This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Now we're going to look at performance management systems. The first thing we need to think about is what is meant by the term system. And the typical representation is this. You have the organization. It has a boundary, and the boundary separates the organization from its environment. There will generally be input going into the organization, output coming out. So in a manufacturing business, the input could be raw materials substantially, and output could be finished goods. So the input is coming from the environment, is coming from suppliers, the output is going to customers. It doesn't have to be material, it could be information coming in. So you could have a news organization where the input is reports from maybe the internet, from its own reporters and so on, and the output is going to be news broadcasts or newspapers. Systems can, in theory at any rate, be open or closed. An open system is where it does receive information or material or energy or something from the environment and will normally spill something out into the environment again. A closed system doesn't have that. A closed system is kind of completely isolated, and though it may exist in theory, in practice closed systems are going to have very short lives. If you're not supplying in information or energy, it's hard to know how you're going to be having a long life there. If you're not bringing in raw materials, you're not going to be able to keep producing output. So that's very kind of theoretical, really. It's sometimes used as a kind of not maybe as a whole closed system, but if you took an organization which didn't take into account what competitors were doing or what its customers' tastes were, in a way it's cut itself off from some of that input information, and if it doesn't keep up with the times and keep up with taste, then again it's not going to have much of a life. Most systems can then be broken down into subsystems. So you could take the system as being the accounting system, and then we have maybe the sales or the purchases system, the sales, the production system, the sales system, and so on. And each one of these subsystems has its boundary, and really the rest of the organization is part of the environment of that subsystem. What's the point in this? Well, if you're going to be dividing into subsystems, you have to decide what's the input and what's the output, which really means you are deciding what is this subsystem actually responsible for. So if you take inventory, is inventory the responsibility of the kind of warehouse subsystem, or is it more the responsibility for the production subsystem? You could envisage either working. It could be the production system which is going to spark off orders to bring in goods as they're needed, or it could be done in the inventory system as you fall below reorder level. It maybe doesn't much matter, but it's important to know where the lines of demarcation are, what's part of our system and what's part of the environment needs to be worked out. Systems often have feedback, and here we have a single loop feedback system. Think of it as variance analysis, really. You input the raw material, you process it, and you output finished goods. You measure what you've output, and then you have a comparator here with a standard. Basically, you're comparing the actual cost of production with the standard cost of production. And then you have an effector here, something which may say, look, you've had an adverse materials usage variance, you need to do something about it. So maybe it's telling people to kind of pull their socks up, maybe it's adjusting a machine, maybe it's buying better material, maybe it's training people better. But if you're going to get rid of this departure from the standards, you probably need to do something about it. Negative feedback is where you apply feedback to bring something back towards the plan. So if costs were going above what you had budgeted for, you would put some sort of system in place to try to reduce those costs. Maybe extra authorities needed to spend money and you cut out some expenditure and so on. That's negative feedback. Positive feedback is where you want to increase the deviation from budget, and that would be typical maybe in sales. So your budget for selling is 1,000 per month, you're selling 1,200 per month. It's unlikely that you're going to apply negative feedback to that. You can say, oh look, you've done 1,200 this month, let's maybe try 1,250 next month. Feedback tends to be reporting on something which has already happened, very often correcting something which has already happened so it doesn't happen again. Feed-forward control is anticipating really that something wrong will occur in the future, and we want to avoid that. So if you're looking at a cash flow forecast on a spreadsheet and you put in January sales, February sales, March sales, and they're all a bit below what you'd actually hoped for, then you can see in maybe September where you're just staying under your overdraft now because of the poor sales. You see you're going to go over your overdraft. Feed-forward control would be maybe negotiating a bigger overdraft with the bank in plenty of time, or maybe deferring some capital expenditure that's maybe going to happen in May so that you keep more cash in the bank. One of the problems with a single loop feedback system is when you come to compare here, comparing two things really, you're comparing the actual with the budget, or the actual with the standard. And the difference there is really the result of two figures. And just as the actual figures may be wrong, the budget or standards might be wrong. So what the double loop feedback system does, it allows environmental influences to come in, and that's maybe going to change the standard. So for example, you would look maybe at what the world commodity price of copper, what's happened over the year. You see it's risen up maybe 30% over the year. There's not much point in you maybe comparing actual results with a standard which is obviously out of date. It's almost getting on for planning and operational variances. You are going to be undermining the control system. If people look at this, they say, well, I know I'm over budget, but what do you expect me to do with it? The raw material prices increased by 30%. We have to buy it anyway. I'm doing a good job buying it. And it, as I say, it kind of undermines the whole business. And also it's actually going to be quite difficult to fix it unless you realize that maybe the standard is wrong. Problems with control systems. You can give people the wrong targets. Maybe the targets are far too difficult to reach. Or maybe what it is you give people a target for high volume of production, and maybe what customers are actually more interested in is high quality of production. Changed environment, as we said. Prices going up outside our control. Inaccurate measurement. We measure the output, but we don't measure it very accurately in some way. It's going to throw up spurious differences. Delay is a big problem in feedback systems. If we go back to this one here, you have to measure it. You have to do the comparison. Somebody has to do that. Maybe you have to produce some sort of report. Maybe somebody else then has to get around to actually doing something about it. And you can easily see that weeks would really go by, potentially, without corrective action being taken. That's a really big risk. Hopefully it has been reduced now by IT. IT systems can often measure performance in real time and produce almost every day, every next day, the figures. So typically big retail businesses that chains all around the country, they're recording what's been sold through the tills and the scanning machines and so on. They will know tomorrow morning how sales of each product have done, and whether or not maybe we need to reduce the price of a product because it's sticking. Human reaction, defensive mechanisms, emotion almost in here. Bosses have to be relatively careful perhaps in how they criticize people, especially perhaps if they haven't properly taken into account the changed environment, where employees can feel really hard done by. They're blamed for going over a budget, cost budget, and it's really outside their control. Measuring the right things. We kind of got on here a little bit, maybe too tight a target, but make sure that you spread your targets around widely, and it's not just quantitative things we're going to be measuring. There's a concentration by people on what's measured. There's a saying that what gets measured gets changed, and the corollary of that is what doesn't get measured gets ignored substantially. So if you know you're going to be appraised on the volume of output, but not appraised on the quality of output, you're going to concentrate in getting the volume up to the budgeted level almost at all costs. Identifying the causes of variations here, and this we can link with interdependencies here. We all know that you can have a, let's say, a favorable price variance, but at the same time there might be an unfavorable and adverse usage variance. Why did we get a favorable price variance? Is it because of the buyer's been clever? Is it because the buyer's silly but the world price just went down? Is it that the buyer has been devious, and what the buyer is doing is buying inferior quality material, and then the inferior quality material bought cheaply is going to put up the adverse usage variance, because the poor old manufacturing department's getting through kind of tons of this stuff because a lot of it is useless. So we need to be really quite careful. We can often do figures, get figures out, but whether you can believe in those figures or whether those figures explain why they've happened is quite a different matter. In general, another list of problems that arise with performance management systems, misrepresentation, that's basically manipulating data, changing data, not reporting data accurately, because you know you're going to be kind of told off because you've gone over a cost budget. Gaming. Gaming is, for example, you've got two divisions, and maybe what you do is you sabotage another division. You don't, I'm not saying physically necessarily, but I'm just saying you maybe don't pass on information to the other division that will be useful to them. You kind of keep that for yourself so that your sales look high and theirs have been hijacked a little bit by you. That's gaming. Misinterpretation, you look maybe at an adverse variance and you don't properly understand what has caused it. Short-termism, a great big problem. Many people feel under huge pressure to hit a profit target for the year, because the financial statements are going to be published for the year, and they know that the stock exchange and commentators and people commenting in the newspapers on won't like it if the profit is below. So there can be a tendency here, maybe, why don't we cut some discretionary costs? Why don't we put maybe R&D down? Maybe we put the training down. Maybe we put the kind of routine repairs down and so on. Repairs and maintenance down. So what we're doing is we are boosting this year's profits by cutting some maybe relatively discretionary costs. We're doing fine this year, but 2 or 3 years down the road, sales will fall because we haven't been doing the R&D to get new products. Good people are leaving because they're not getting the training they expected. The machines are effectively having to suffer huge repair costs because we haven't been doing the routine maintenance. Measurement fixation. People essentially get fixed on the measurements. They almost do anything to make sure that they look good. They could, as we've seen with, say, return on investment and the visualization there, what they're going to be doing is maybe turning down otherwise good investments simply because it's depleting or reducing very slightly their return on investment. Tunnel vision, you concentrate on what's kind of measured and nothing else. Sub-optimization, an example of that would be you're given a sales budget of, let's say, 100,000 units. Once you get up to 100,000 units, why would you try any further? You could have maybe sold 120,000 units. Well, hey, well, why not leave that extra 20,000 units to next year and have a nice head start almost till next year? And ossification. Ossification means turn to bone. It means that we're put in a performance management system and it hasn't really changed. It hasn't adapted maybe to what people believe is important for performance management. So maybe increasingly people feel that a very fast response is important. People are used to kind of emailing, getting answers back very quickly, or getting instant answers back from a website. But you don't measure maybe the response time taken by your staff to answering people's queries. It simply wasn't in the original performance management system, and we haven't adapted to put it in. So the performance management system begins kind of measuring stuff which isn't really what we need to measure. And we think we're doing well, but only because we're doing well in the wrong stuff. Budgets can form a big part of performance management. This is just a little list of all the sort of things that budgets can do for you. Obviously, you have to forecast the budget, so they force you to forecast, they force you to look ahead, which is quite important. Then planning and control. So you know roughly maybe how many people you're going to need to employ. And by comparing actual to budget, you're establishing control. You give somebody an advertising budget, you're essentially saying you can spend up to that. Coordination. If you're making 100,000 units, there's not much point in doing that if you only sell 80,000. And then if you only distribute 70,000, you're going to be in more trouble. You want all the bits of the organization to be kind of in scale with one another. Authorization, giving somebody a budget, saying, here, you can spend $250,000 in advertising. Don't come running to me with little dribs and drabs of expenditure authorization. You've got $250,000 there. Spend it in the best way you think. So it allows you to kind of devolve power to people, yet you're saying, but don't you dare go over 250,000. That's your limit. But within that, spend it how you think. Motivation. People in general like being given targets. Two things can happen with targets if they're wrong. If this let's say this is your kind of natural performance, and you put a budget down there, a very slack, easy to get budget, then you're probably going to pull down people's performance. People will take it easy. If you put it up there, then people are probably going to say, well, I could try a little bit harder and I could get the budget. If, however, you put it up there, people will say, look, no matter how hard I try, I'm never going to get there. And if you habitually get these very, very difficult budgets, the chances are they will fall into, people won't respect them anymore as valid targets to aim at. And it's terribly bad for morale. You keep missing the budget, you keep having to explain that. Even worse, if your boss keeps shouting at you for missing this impossible budget, it's not going to do anything for performance. And finally, evaluation. You compare actual performance with budgeted performance. We've said already you have to be careful, say on price variances, usage variances. Just because somebody is above or below budget doesn't mean they have been responsible for that or are at fault on that. An evaluation here really does have to be as fair as you can make it. Let's say somebody goes over the budget for repairing machinery. You could shout at them, you could take a very what's called budget constrained approach. Say you've gone over the repairs for the machinery, I don't want to hear anything about it. But what would be called a profit conscious approach is the person who say, yes, I did go over the repairs, but we're working on a really, really important export order. If this had been late, then we would have got no more business at all from this very good customer. I took the decision to spend more on repairs because in the long term it's going to help our profitability. That's the sort of flexible reaction you want when it comes to evaluating people's performance. There are, of course, some times when you cannot simply afford for people to go over the budget. You go out, you're going to run out of cash. So even if the whole machine breaks down, you can't spend money repairing it for another month because we will simply run out of cash and we won't be able to pay the wages. But often it's possible to be more creative or more flexible, shall we say, in evaluating performance. There is a school of thought called Beyond Budgeting, which says that conventional budgeting is actually not terribly useful. And I won't go through all of these lists in here, all of the items on the list. But for example, they say it's immensely time-consuming drawing up a budget. There are statistics around which suggest that maybe 80% of a manager's time is dealt with in budget-related activities. You have to draw it up, you have to negotiate it, and then every month the actual results are compared to the budget. You're thinking up your excuses, maybe, and really what you should be doing is maybe spending more time with customers and spending more time with the budget. Generally, very often when something is in the budget is kind of etched in stone. It's very difficult maybe to shift items of expenditure around to where they're needed and so on. So it maybe lacks flexibility. They're quite often only for the next year. So the longer term idea of strategy, where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years and so on, is often missed out from the budgeting process, which typically only looks 1 year ahead. They're very good on cost reduction. They measure the costs and they say don't go over that cost there. But what happens if you went over a cost, maybe an advertising budget, and sales really increased? You kind of chose a moment for a very good advert, maybe from sporting victory of a team. You spend that extra money. It's quite hard to tie in convincingly, yes, I did spend more on advertising, but we did get more sales. It's almost a voluntary belief or an article of faith almost that one has caused the other. Going on down a little bit, they're often updated too infrequently, so they become out of date even during the year there. They're often guesses, estimates, last year plus a bit more for hope, and so on there. People can be very defensive in their departments. They become unhelpful for other departments because if I help that department, I'm going to be spending a little bit more. That's showing up on my budget report as an adverse cost variance. So I'm not going to help them. I'm going to look after myself. And again, this business of not really allowing people to be flexible, not allowing people to make creative decisions, but kind of saying you must stay to the cost budget at all costs, really, makes talented people feel quite undervalued. Beyond budgeting suggests that what we should be doing is maybe measuring our success against the competition and measuring our success, maybe get external benchmarks. It's not so important that we keep to a particular advertising cost budget. What's important is that our profit increases well compared maybe to the competitors there. You have to release a bit of central power. You want to empower operational managers by allowing them freer access to resources, which isn't going to be constrained by a budget figure. And we want to be more outward looking. We should be looking at customers. This is where our money comes from, rather than maybe too much concentrating on budgets and sticking to costs. When it comes to measurement, we have to think, what do you measure in performance management? We can take information in general. It can then divide into non-financial and financial. Financial information is what we're particularly familiar with, the costs, the revenues, and so on. It is obviously going to be quantitative, it's in money. But then the non-financial measures here, that can be quantitative and qualitative. So you could have a non-financial measure trying to assess customer satisfaction. The quantitative one could be measuring how often a customer comes back, repeat orders, you're getting at sort of numbers. Qualitative, you might ask them their opinion, maybe give you a score. Quite often these are kind of almost eventually turned into a quantitative measure, but they start off asking people's impression of you, and that's also very important. Where do we look to see what we should be measuring? Well, there's the company's mission statement. So if your mission is, we are a maker of high performance cars, then immediately this is kind of focusing you on what's important for this company. You will be measuring presumably things like the reliability of these cars. You maybe be looking at even things like does it accelerate well, does it hold its value, and so on. There, what's the quality like, the reliability and so on like of these cars. You can then look at the stakeholders. We've got various stakeholders like shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and so on there. And if you have a powerful stakeholder, something who's called a key player has power and will act on that power, then broadly you have to keep them happy. So a key player could be a large customer who takes maybe 80% of your output. This is very important to you. If this customer abandons you, you're in trouble. So you would be thinking, right, what's important to this customer? And I'll measure that. It might be the cost per unit, it might be the quality, it might be the time to delivery, all sorts of stuff that this person might be interested in. It might be that the key player is a powerful shareholder, and if the key player is a powerful shareholder, then you'll be measuring things presumably like profit, earnings per share, share price, and so on. This is what's going to keep them happy. The structure of the company can have something to do with it. We've looked at divisionalized companies. We've said there you've got return on investment, residual income, economic value added. If it's not divisionalized, some of those become less relevant, and so on. How have we divided it into cost centers, profit centers, investment centers? If it's just cost centers, all you're really going to be measuring is cost. If it's profit centers, you'll be measuring the cost, and the sales, essentially the profit's going to be important there. The human resources, what are we going to measure about human resources? If these are highly skilled people, you should be measuring stuff like staff turnover. Because if these people are hard to get hold of, hard to recruit, take a lot of training, they have a lot of knowledge perhaps locked up here, then it's very important for you to measure what's important there, which is low staff turnover. And ideally you'd want high staff satisfaction so that they're not tempted maybe to move somewhere else. Could be quality, we said over here with these key players. If someone thinks quality is important, then you have to measure that. If they think flexibility and response time is important, then you have to measure that. There's no set things that you have to measure. It depends on the business and what's important to the business and its stakeholders in the performance. Now, the balanced scorecard is a particularly useful way of trying to generate ideas for performance measurement. I think it's a delightful kind of a model. It has got these 4 perspectives, or if you like, 4 things it measures, 4 areas it measures. And it's in a hierarchy, really. It's saying that for profit-seeking organizations, what is ultimately responsible is a financial perspective. So we're dead okay on that. We know as accountants what you would measure: cash flow, profit, earnings per share, return on capital employed, share price, and so on. And we've no problem thinking of ordinary financial measures that will tell us how the thing is doing financially. But what Kaplan and Norton said, okay, you could measure earnings per share or share price, but nothing about that tells you why the earnings per share went up or why the return on capital went up. It's measuring the results, not the causes, in a way. And Kaplan and Norton said the first thing that leads to a good financial perspective is happy customers. These are your only sources of revenue, and if you don't have happy, satisfied customers who keep coming back and are willing to pay you a decent price, who like you, are loyal to you really, then your financial results are going to be disappointing and maybe short term. So customers are our immediate cause of success, and therefore we should measure something about customers. How happy, content are they with us? How loyal are they? How much esteem do they hold us? How much do they respect us, and so on, is all very important to getting good financial results. So the sort of things we might measure to get some aspects, this is not a comprehensive list, some aspects of how much our customers like us. They keep coming back for repeat orders. There are some industries where customers churn. They just get no no loyalty at all. They just go for the best deal each time, and so on. Happens a lot in mobile phone contracts. You can go out and give them questionnaires. Ask them, how did we do? You can look at sales growth. If sales growth is increasing very nicely, then presumably we're doing something right with our customers. Quite often, if you go on the internet as a new customer, they will have a little drop-down list saying, and how did you hear about us? And one of the things you can highlight there is you were maybe told about it by a friend or a colleague. And that's what they love, because it means that a friend or colleague of yours has been so pleased with the company that they're passing on the good news. So what makes our customers happy, and what makes our customers happy, is you doing what you promise to do, which could be almost anything. So you have to do well what you promise you're going to do well. So for some companies, they want low cost per unit. So if you're making something fairly ordinary for the house, no great risk associated with it of any sort, and then if you're making these components, your customer want low cost per unit, because it's a mass-produced item that's low cost per unit. It's going to make a big difference to their profitability. If, however, you were, let's say, an engineering company, and you were making and selling items to like Airbus or Boeing, this is going to be incorporated into their aeroplanes, and if this component fails, the aeroplane's going to crash. Now they, in a way, almost don't care about cost per unit, that's overstating it, but what's top of their list is fantastic quality, that you can guarantee that this item will not fail. Some other people want time to delivery, so they want to be able to deliver within 3 hours or something like that. That's what keeps them happy. There's a famous computer company called Dell. You may not have heard it. It's gone down a little bit here. But it was at one stage absolutely preeminent in producing desktop computers, really. Produced them in America. And what it did was it insisted that any supplier, it would be sending out orders every half hour to suppliers, and the suppliers had to deliver the goods within 1 hour. Because it's a very sophisticated just-in-time inventory system that required this kind of instant response. So there it was very important, if you were a supplier to Dell, to measure how's our quality, how's our reliability on delivery, and so on. Also important here can be efficiency measures. We need to be reasonably efficient in our internal business activities if we're going to make a decent profit at the end of the day. And finally, what they have is innovation and learning perspective. Really what they're saying is, look, here's you. You could be the best of the bunch at the moment. But here's all these competitors down here. They want to be best. They will be developing new products, developing new processes. They will want to leapfrog you so that they do better for their customers now than you are doing. So really, this is saying, if you rest on your laurels, if you relax, you might be doing really well now, but it really assures the sun's going to rise tomorrow. In 2 or 3 years, someone will have overtaken you. And again, we could maybe mention the firm Nokia. So Nokia at one stage is about 60% of the mobile phone market. I think people in the market leads, they get tied into particular technologies and so on. That's how they're making a profit. It can be quite difficult to get out of that kind of groove almost. And it would generally be said in articles you read about Nokia's problems, is that maybe they didn't innovate quickly enough. They didn't go for the smartphone approach quickly enough, and were then, of course, overtaken by the iPhones and essentially overtaken by Samsung, the phones as well. So if innovation and learning is important to you keeping ahead of the pack, you must measure it, because if you don't measure it, people won't know to do it or they will ignore it. So you could set budgets or measure how many new products you have to launch in a year. Maybe it's patents filed if you're in some sort of research type company. Maybe for your people it's kind of qualifications gained in the year, courses attended during the year. It could even be the amount that you spend on research and development, although of course that doesn't guarantee there's going to be any output. And finally, we look briefly at quality. Quality has become, I think, increasingly important in the success of organizations, and they run a big risk to their business and their profits if they produce goods of inferior quality. The first thing to say is that quality is not absolute. We are all perfectly aware that when we go to, let's say, buy a t-shirt, we've got a big choice. So you could actually go to a supermarket and buy a t-shirt for about £6, or you could go to a kind of designer shop and you might be able to buy a t-shirt for £60. And there wouldn't be that much difference maybe looking at them. But if you washed the expensive t-shirt and it kind of fell apart or faded after a couple of washes, you wouldn't be too pleased. But if you washed your cheap £6 t-shirt a couple of times and it faded, well, you kind of shrug your shoulders a little bit. You kind of say, I know it was cheap, it can't have been great quality. So quality is very much in the eye of the beholder, and it is meeting the expectations of the holder, of the owner of that product, given what they've paid. So it's a bit of a moving feast. It's being honest with people. Now, the cost of quality can be divided into four. And this was a useful kind of an experiment was done, because one of the big kind of quality gurus, I think it was Crosby, it doesn't really matter, came out with the amazing kind of statement: quality is free. And this person was working for Japanese industry after the war, really. And he promoted the idea quality is free. And this was really a complete anathema to many people in Europe and America. If you take cars, for example, the idea was, if we make better cars with better metal and better paint and better components of the engine and so on, all we're doing is adding costs to this. Is going to be hurting our profit. Whereas the Japanese approach to cars was very, very different. And of course, they've kind of had huge success in the car industry. And this idea that quality is free was almost kind of proved by these four costs. And first of all, imagine a production line where there's no quality control whatsoever. You make the item, you send it out. So whenever the item fails, as some will fail, this is called external failure costs. It's failing with the customer. And this is going to be really expensive. It's going to irritate the customer. You're going to have to bring the item back, replace the item. You maybe try to repair it, fail to repair it, but it's really expensive. Instead of having no quality costs at all, really, or no quality effort at all, which is going to give you big costs, you say, why don't I, at the end of the production line, let's say you're making a television, at the end of the production line, you turn the TV on for a couple of hours, let it kind of heat up and so on. See if it works well for 2 hours. Some will, some won't. But at least the ones that fail, they haven't done any damage to your customers. They haven't hurt their goodwill. You don't have to replace them. You have to repair them, but it's going to be cheaper. A little bit spent in putting on your television, testing just before it goes out, is going to save you money in the long term. And then you say, well, what would happen if we moved it back? So at each stage that the television goes through, we test it. Does it still work? Does it still work? Does it still work? So it might go, yes, it works, yes, it works, yes, it works. No, it doesn't. Then you know it's that last step that's caused the damage. So it's going to be much faster, much easier for you to repair that. You don't have a whole machine that you have to fault find. And finally then there is prevention costs. Organize stuff so that things can't go wrong. And the first thing in prevention here that you manage to do to stop things going wrong is design. Design stuff properly. Build in components which are of the right quality. So if you think maybe the maximum current that you go through this is 3 amps, well, maybe put in a wire that will take 4 amps, just for that bit of safety. You can design it, so that if you have to put in a cable of some sort, you've got a plug like that. And the plug will only fit the one way, it will simply not fit the other way. That's preventing things being connected improperly. There's training. There's good components. The real risk of beating your suppliers down to the very last cent. They need to make a profit. And maybe what happens if you kind of beat them down and down and down and down in price, they begin to skimp on their quality and they send you components which are of inferior quality, and therefore it's going to mean that you make a product of inferior product. And they say that spending more money there is going to save you overall and helps. It's going to give you kind of almost perfect production, hence quality is free. You save far more money there than you spend there. The quality cost is divided into, then these are grouped together here. Prevention and appraisal costs are usually known as costs of conformance. Improving quality, preventing things going wrong, appraising stuff that goes wrong, and maybe altering the production technique slightly. And then we have costs of non-conformance. This is where things in a way go wrong in a big way. You've ended up with goods that have failed in some way, and we have a cost of non-conformance in that. But getting the right quality is extremely important.